Welcome back to Reddit Whispers. So how shall I start, man? I just don't know. I never saw it coming, not really. Not in the way you see a storm brewing on the horizon, a tangible darkness that warns you to seek shelter. This was different, a slow, creeping fog that seeped into the foundations of everything I thought was solid, a silent erosion of the world I had meticulously built around her, around us. My girl and I, we had been together for almost 2 years, 24 months that felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. It was the kind of love story you read about, the kind that makes cynics roll their eyes and romantics sigh with a knowing smile. We were that couple, the one whose laughter echoed a little too loudly in quiet restaurants, whose hands were always intertwined, a permanent, unspoken connection. I remember the beginning, the sheer, unadulterated newness of it all. Every shared glance was a discovery, every conversation a journey into the uncharted territory of her mind. I learned the topography of her smile, the subtle shift in her eyes when she was truly happy versus when she was just being polite. I memorized the cadence of her speech, the way her voice would climb a little higher when she was excited about something, a new book she was reading or a silly video she'd seen online. I fell in love with the small things, the insignificant details that composed the masterpiece that was her. The way she'd bite her lower lip when she was concentrating, the little hum she made at the back of her throat when she tasted something she loved, the way she'd steal my hoodies and wear them until they smelled more like her than me. These were the bricks and mortar of my love, the foundation upon which I built my future, our future. I was all in, a high-stakes gambler who had pushed all his chips to the center of the table, confident in the hand I was dealt. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversations weaving a tapestry of shared dreams and inside jokes. We planned road trips that we never took, debated the names of children we didn't have, and argued playfully over which one of us was the better cook, even though we both knew it was her. I was her sous chef, her loyal taste tester, and the designated dishwasher, a role I accepted with a mock grumble but secret pride. I loved watching her in the kitchen, a whirlwind of flour and spices, her face smudged with chocolate, a look of fierce concentration in her eyes. It was in these mundane moments that I felt the most profound sense of peace, a quiet contentment that whispered, "This is it, this is home." I worked hard, pulling extra shifts, taking on freelance projects, all with a single-minded focus. To build a life for us, a life that was comfortable and secure, a life where she would never have to worry about anything. I pictured it all so clearly. A small house with a big garden, a dog we'd rescue from the local shelter, the sound of our children's laughter filling the rooms. It wasn't just a daydream. It was a blueprint, a tangible goal that fueled me through long nights and early mornings. Every dollar I earned, every ounce of effort I expended, was an investment in that future in her. And she seemed to be on the same page, her enthusiasm a mirror of my own. We'd spend hours scrolling through real estate websites, pointing out houses we liked, imagining where we'd put the couch and what color we'd paint the bedroom. Her excitement was my validation, the proof that I was on the right path. But then something began to shift, a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the atmosphere between us. It wasn't a sudden earthquake that shattered our world, but a slow, tectonic drift, pulling us apart by millimeters each day. It started with the texts, or rather the lack of them. Our constant stream of communication, the digital thread that connected us throughout the day, began to dry up. The playful good morning messages became less frequent, the midday check-ins dwindled to single-word replies, and the good night I love you texts, the ones I had come to rely on as a final, comforting anchor to my day, sometimes never came at all. When I brought it up, she'd brush it off with a casual, "Oh, I was just busy with work," or "My phone died, sorry." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. I told myself I was being needy, clingy, that I needed to give her space. I was the one who was paranoid, insecure, reading too much into nothing. I convinced myself that this was just a phase, a natural evolution in a long-term relationship. The initial, fiery intensity couldn't last forever, right? It had to settle into a comfortable, steady burn. This was just us settling. So I ignored the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, the little voice in the back of my head that screamed something was wrong. I pushed it down, buried it under a mountain of self-doubt and rationalizations. I became a master of self-deception, an architect of my own ignorance. Then the distance began to manifest in person, a physical and emotional chasm that opened up between us, even when we were in the same room. The easy, comfortable silences we once shared now felt heavy, fraught with unspoken words. The laughter that used to come so easily now felt forced, a hollow echo of what it once was. She was there, physically present, but her mind seemed to be 1,000 miles away. Her eyes would glaze over when I was talking, a blank, distant look that made me feel like I was speaking to a stranger. I'd try to pull her back, to bridge the gap with a joke or a touch, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. She'd offer a fleeting smile, a brief, lukewarm touch before retreating back into her own world. The intimacy, the very lifeblood of our relationship, was draining away, and I was powerless to stop it. We'd lie in bed at night, a foot of cold, empty space between us, a silent testament to the growing distance. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, a million questions screaming for answers. Was it something I did? Did I say something wrong? Am I not enough for her anymore? The self-doubt was a relentless poison, seeping into every corner of my mind, eroding my confidence, my sense of self. I became a ghost in my own relationship, haunting the periphery of her life, desperate for any scrap of affection, any sign that the woman I loved was still in there somewhere. I tried harder, doubling down on my efforts to be the perfect boyfriend. I cooked her favorite meals, planned elaborate date nights, bought her thoughtful gifts, all in a desperate attempt to reignite the spark that was fading before my eyes. But it was like trying to light a fire with damp wood. My grand gestures were met with a polite but detached appreciation. She'd thank me, kiss me on the cheek, and then the wall would go back up, leaving me on the outside looking in. I was a man fighting a losing battle, a lone soldier defending a crumbling fortress. The signs were all there, a constellation of red flags that I chose to ignore. The late nights at work that became more frequent, the hushed phone calls she'd take in another room, the way she'd angle her phone away from me when she was texting. I saw it all, but I refused to see it. My love for her was a blindfold, a thick, comforting darkness that shielded me from the painful truth. I clung to the past, to the memory of the woman I fell in love with, convinced that she was still there, that this was just a temporary storm we had to weather together. I was a fool, a blind, hopeful fool, and my foolishness was leading me down a path of self-destruction. I was so invested in the dream, in the future I had so carefully constructed, that I couldn't bear the thought of it all falling apart. My identity had become so intertwined with hers, with our relationship, that I didn't know who I was without her. The thought of being alone, of starting over, was a terrifying abyss that I couldn't bring myself to face. So I stayed. I endured the slow, agonizing death of our love, pretending that everything was fine, that we were fine. I smiled, I laughed, I played the part of the happy, devoted boyfriend, all while my heart was breaking, piece by piece. The weight of it all was crushing me, the constant anxiety, the gnawing uncertainty. I was living on a knife's edge, constantly on guard, analyzing her every word, her every action, searching for clues, for reassurance, for something, anything to hold onto. My friends saw it, they tried to warn me, their words of concern cloaked in casual questions. How are things with you and her? You seem a little down lately, everything okay? But I pushed them away, I lied. I told them everything was great, that I'd never been happier. I couldn't admit the truth, not even to myself, because to admit it would be to make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to let go. I was a man in denial, a captain going down with his ship, clinging to the wreckage of a love that was already lost. I was so focused on keeping us afloat that I didn't realize I was drowning. The silence in our apartment became a physical entity, a heavy, suffocating presence that filled every room. I'd come home from work, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread, praying that today would be different, that today she would look at me with the same love and adoration she used to. But every day was the same. I'd find her on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a blank expression on her face, a million miles away. I'd try to start a conversation to tell her about my day, but my words would just hang in the air, unanswered, absorbed by the oppressive silence. It was a slow, agonizing torture, a daily reminder of everything I had lost. I was losing her and I was losing myself in the process. The vibrant, confident man I once was had been replaced by a hollow shell, a man consumed by insecurity and fear. I stopped going out with my friends, I lost interest in my hobbies, my work began to suffer. My entire world had shrunk to the size of our apartment, to the four walls that had become my prison. And yet I stayed. I stayed because I was a coward. I was afraid of the pain, of the loneliness, of the unknown. I was afraid of admitting that I had failed, that our love had failed. So I clung to the hope, the last desperate flicker of a dying flame, that somehow, someway, we could find our way back to each other. I told myself that all relationships go through rough patches, that this was just a test of our love. If we could just get through this, we'd be stronger than ever. It was a beautiful lie, a comforting fantasy that I wrapped myself in like a warm blanket. But the cold, hard reality was that I was alone, even when she was sitting right next to me. I was a man in love with a memory, a ghost of a woman who no longer existed. The person I was sharing my life with was a stranger, a polite, distant roommate who happened to share my bed. The intimacy, the connection, the very essence of what made us, was gone, replaced by a cold, sterile emptiness. And the worst part was I let it happen. I stood by and watched as our love withered and died, too afraid to face the truth, too weak to walk away. I chose the slow, agonizing pain of a dying relationship over the sharp, clean break of an ending. I was a broken man, long before the final, devastating blow was delivered. I was a man who had lost himself in the pursuit of a love that was no longer real, a man who had sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of a beautiful but ultimately empty dream. I was a man on the verge of collapse, and I didn't even know it. The foundation of my world was crumbling beneath my feet, and all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by fear and denial, waiting for the inevitable fall. And fall it did, harder and more brutally than I could have ever imagined. The silence was the loudest sound in my life, a constant, roaring emptiness that filled the spaces where her laughter used to be. It was in the other side of the bed, cold and undisturbed. It was in the passenger seat of my car, a void that I tried to fill with talk radio and podcasts, anything to drown out the sound of my own thoughts. It was in the kitchen, where I now cooked for one, the recipes we used to make together feeling like a cruel mockery. Each silent meal was a testament to my solitude, a stark reminder of the future that had been stolen from me. I became a connoisseur of silence, able to distinguish its different textures and weights. There was the heavy, suffocating silence of the night, when the darkness amplified my loneliness, when every creak of the house sounded like her footsteps. There was the hollow, echoing silence of the morning, when the sun would stream through the windows of our apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a beautiful, tragic ballet in a world devoid of life. And then there was the worst silence of all, the silence of my own heart, a dull, persistent ache that was a constant companion. The paranoia I had once dismissed as a personal failing now seemed like a prophetic warning, a gut instinct I should have trusted. Hindsight is a cruel, unforgiving teacher, and its lessons were brutal. I replayed every moment of the past few months, every conversation, every interaction, searching for the clues I had missed, the red flags I had so willfully ignored. They were all there, of course, a breadcrumb trail leading directly to this moment of devastation. The way her phone, once a shared device for playing music or looking up directions, had become a fortress, guarded by a new password and a constant, downward tilt. The vague, non-committal answers to my questions about her day, the new friends she never introduced me to, the new hobbies she pursued without me. Each memory was a fresh twist of the knife, a painful reminder of my own blindness. I had been so desperate to believe in the fairy tale that I had ignored the monster lurking in the shadows. I had been so in love with the idea of her, with the woman I thought she was, that I had failed to see the person she had become. The betrayal was not just in the act itself, but in the deception that preceded it, in the months of lies and half-truths that had turned our relationship into a charade. I had been a willing participant in my own deception, a fool who had applauded the magician's trick while being pickpocketed. The anger came later, a slow-burning fire that started in the pit of my stomach and gradually consumed me. It was a hot, righteous anger directed not just at her but at him, the faceless, nameless man who had invaded my life and shattered my world. I imagined him, this phantom lover, and I hated him with a ferocity that surprised me. I hated him for his audacity, for his disrespect, for his role in my undoing. But most of all, I hated him for being the one who got to see the real her, the her that she had hidden from me. While I was playing the part of the devoted, oblivious boyfriend, he was the one she was sharing her secrets with, her laughter with, her body with. The thought was a poison that coursed through my veins, a vile, corrosive acid that ate away at my soul. And then the anger turned inward, a self-loathing that was even more destructive. I hated myself for being so naive, so trusting, so utterly, pathetically blind. I hated myself for not being enough, for not being the man she wanted, the man she needed. I dissected myself, my personality, my appearance, my every action, searching for the fatal flaw that had driven her into the arms of another man. Was I not exciting enough? Was I too predictable, too boring, too nice? The questions were a relentless chorus, a cruel, mocking soundtrack to my misery. I became my own worst enemy, my own harshest critic. The man I saw in the mirror was a stranger, a pathetic, broken creature with hollow eyes and a haunted expression. I didn't recognize him and I didn't want to. I wanted to crawl out of my own skin to escape the prison of my own mind. But there was no escape. The pain was a constant physical presence, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe, a knot in my stomach that made it impossible to eat. I lost weight, my clothes hanging off my emaciated frame. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford, my nights spent tossing and turning, haunted by nightmares of her and him, their faces contorted in a grotesque mockery of my pain. The world outside my apartment became a blur, a muted gray landscape that I moved through like a ghost. I went to work. I went through the motions, but I was not really there. I was a hollow man, an automaton programmed to perform the basic functions of life, while my soul was screaming in silent agony. The future I had so meticulously planned, the future that had been the driving force of my life, was gone. It had been wiped out, erased, as if it had never existed. And in its place there was just a vast, terrifying emptiness, a blank canvas with no picture to paint. I was adrift, a ship without a rudder, lost in a sea of pain and confusion. I didn't know who I was anymore or where I was going. All I knew was the all-consuming, soul-crushing pain of a broken heart. It was a pain that I thought would kill me, a pain that I sometimes wished would. Because in the depths of my despair, death seemed like a welcome release from the unbearable agony of living. But I didn't die. I just continued to exist, a shadow of my former self, a broken man wandering through the ruins of his life, searching for a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that someday, somehow, the sun would rise again. But in the darkness of my grief, the dawn seemed a long, long way off. And the silence, the goddamn silence, was the only thing that was real. It was the only thing I could count on, the only thing that would never leave me. It was my constant companion, my tormentor, my only friend. It was the sound of my broken heart, the sound of my shattered life, the sound of a love that was gone forever. And it was a sound that I knew I would never forget. So there I was, a man on autopilot, my life reduced to a series of mechanical motions. Wake up, go to work, come home, stare at the walls. The vibrant colors of my world had been leached out, replaced by a monotonous, soul-crushing gray. The future I had so meticulously mapped out with her, Every detail etched in my mind with the sharp clarity of a love-struck fool had vanished. It was a ghost city, a collection of abandoned dreams and broken promises. Yet even in this desolate landscape of my own making, a part of me, a small, stubborn, idiotic part, still clung to a sliver of hope. It was a foolish, desperate hope, the kind that keeps a drowning man reaching for a phantom rope. I told myself that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a temporary lapse in judgment on her part. I imagined her showing up at my door, her eyes filled with remorse, begging for my forgiveness. I played out the scene in my head 1,000 times, a self-indulgent fantasy that provided a fleeting, pathetic comfort. I was a man living in a self-constructed prison of denial, and the keys were in my hand, but I was too afraid to use them. The truth was a blinding, terrifying light that I was not yet ready to face. So I remained in the shadows, clinging to the comforting darkness of my own delusions. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony, a twisted way of forcing you to confront the very things you are trying to avoid. And so, on a day that started like any other gray, meaningless day, I decided to do something out of the ordinary. It wasn't a grand, life-altering decision, but a small, spontaneous act, a tiny ripple in the stagnant pond of my existence. I got off work early. I don't know why, a sudden, inexplicable urge to break the monotony, to do something, anything different. The sun was shining, a rare occurrence in the dreary landscape of my life, and for a fleeting moment I felt a flicker of my old self, the spontaneous, romantic fool who believed in grand gestures. And in that moment of weakness I had an idea, a terrible, beautiful, world-shattering idea. I would surprise her. I would show up at our apartment, the apartment that still felt more like ours than mine, with a bouquet of her favorite flowers, the ridiculously expensive peonies that she adored. I would be the man she fell in love with, the man who would fight for her, the man who would not let her go without a fight. It was a stupid, hopelessly romantic notion, the kind of thing you see in movies, the kind of thing that never works in real life. But I was not living in real life. I was living in a desperate fantasy, and in my fantasy this was the grand gesture that would save us, that would bring her back to me. I drove to the flower shop, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. I was a man on a mission, a knight in shining armor on a quest to rescue his princess from the clutches of what? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had to try. I bought the biggest, most beautiful bouquet of pink peonies they had, the price tag a painful reminder of my own foolishness. But I didn't care. This was not about money. This was about us. I walked to the apartment, the flowers a vibrant splash of color against the grayness of my world. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a nervous energy that I hadn't felt in months. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. I rehearsed my speech in my head, the carefully chosen words that would convey my love, my forgiveness, my unwavering commitment. I would be calm, I would be understanding, I would be the bigger man. I would not yell, I would not accuse. I would simply love her, and my love would be enough to heal us, to fix us. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I inserted the key into the lock. I took a deep breath, a final, calming ritual before the storm. I opened the door, a hopeful, stupid smile plastered on my face, and walked into a place that felt wrong. The silence was different this time. It wasn't the empty, hollow silence of a lonely apartment. It was a heavy, charged silence, the kind of silence that precedes a storm, the kind of silence that hangs in the air after a terrible accident. The air was thick with it, a palpable, suffocating presence that immediately put me on edge. The apartment was clean, too clean. The usual clutter of our shared life, the stray books, the half-empty coffee mugs, the discarded clothes, was gone. It was sterile, impersonal, like a hotel room. It was a space that had been scrubbed clean of all traces of me, of us. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a slow, creeping realization that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. My hopeful smile faltered, replaced by a frown of confusion and fear. I called out her name, my voice a weak, trembling sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer. I walked through the apartment, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the empty rooms. The living room, the bedroom, the bathroom, all of them were empty. All of them were sterile. All of them were wrong. It was like I had walked into a parallel universe, a twisted, funhouse mirror version of my own life. And then I saw it. Her phone lying on the kitchen counter, screen up, a beacon in the twilight of my dying hopes. It was a small, innocuous object, a piece of metal and glass, but in that moment it felt like the most menacing thing in the world. It was the black box of our relationship, the repository of all her secrets, the key to a truth that I was not sure I wanted to unlock. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my eyes glued to the phone, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A part of me, the rational, decent part, screamed at me to walk away, to respect her privacy, to not cross this line. But another part of me, the wounded, desperate, paranoid part, the part that had been slowly growing in the darkness of my uncertainty, urged me forward. I had to know. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. The suspense was killing me. The not knowing was a slow, agonizing torture. I needed to rip off the Band-Aid, to face the monster head-on. I was not proud of what I was about to do. I knew it was wrong, a violation of trust, a betrayal in its own right. But in that moment I didn't care. The rules of engagement had changed. The trust was already broken, the betrayal had already occurred. I was just trying to catch up. I was a man on the edge of a precipice, and this phone was the only thing that could either pull me back or push me over. I reached for it, my hand shaking so violently that I could barely grasp it. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. This was it. There was no going back. I picked up the phone, the cool, smooth glass a stark contrast to the turmoil in my soul. I pressed the home button, my thumb hovering over the screen, a moment of final, agonizing hesitation. And then I did it. I swiped up, and the world as I knew it came crashing down around me. The screen lit up, illuminating a string of notifications, a series of daggers to my heart. And there it was, the truth in all its brutal, undeniable glory. A string of messages from a name I didn't recognize, a name that would be forever seared into my memory. The messages were not just friendly, they were intimate, filled with a language of love and longing that she had once reserved only for me. It was a secret world, a parallel life that she had been living right under my nose. And I, the blind, trusting fool, had been completely oblivious. The air rushed out of my lungs, a strangled gasp of pain and disbelief. The flowers fell from my hand, the vibrant pink peonies a cruel, mocking splash of color against the cold, sterile floor. The silence was shattered by the sound of my own heart breaking, a deafening, soul-shattering crescendo. The man who had walked into that apartment with a heart full of hope was gone, replaced by a broken, empty shell. Truth, the truth I had so desperately sought, was a poison that was now coursing through my veins, killing me from the inside out. I had opened Pandora's box, and the demons that had been unleashed would haunt me for the rest of my life. The man who had been so afraid of the fall was now in a free fall, with no parachute, no safety net, just the cold, hard ground rushing up to meet me. And in the wreckage of my shattered world, I finally understood the true meaning of a broken heart. It was not a metaphor. It was a physical, visceral pain, a gaping wound that would never fully heal. It was the death of a dream, the death of a future, the death of the man I used to be. And it was all there on the screen of her phone, a testament to my own foolishness, my own blindness, my own heartbreaking, soul-crushing naivety. The messages were a torrent, a relentless flood of words that washed over me, drowning me in a sea of betrayal. Each one was a perfectly crafted dagger, aimed with precision at the most vulnerable parts of my heart. They were from some guy I didn't know, a faceless phantom who had stolen my life, my love, my future. His name was a common one, a simple, unassuming name that now felt like a curse, a vile, four-letter word that would forever be associated with the deepest pain I had ever known. The words on the screen blurred together, a chaotic jumble of letters that formed a tapestry of my own personal hell. I miss you. The words were so simple, so innocent, yet they were a gut punch that knocked the wind out of me. I remembered all the times she had said those words to me, her voice a soft, comforting whisper in my ear. Now those same words were a weapon, a testament to her deceit. She had missed him while I was missing her. She had been longing for him while I was longing for a woman who no longer existed. "I can't wait to see you." The exclamation mark was a cruel, mocking flourish, a celebration of my own demise. I pictured them together, their clandestine meetings, their stolen moments of passion. The images were a poison, a vile, corrosive acid that burned through my mind, leaving behind a trail of scorched earth. I saw them in our favorite restaurant, sitting in our booth, his hand covering hers on the table. I saw them in the park where we had our first date, their laughter echoing in the place where we had once shared our dreams. I saw them in our bed, the sacred space that had once been a symbol of our love, now defiled by their betrayal. The thought was a physical blow, a wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. "You make me feel special." This was the one that broke me. This was the one that shattered the last remaining vestiges of my hope, because I had made her feel special. I had spent 2 years of my life dedicated to that single purpose. I had worshipped the ground she walked on, I had put her on a pedestal, I had made her the center of my universe. And it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. Someone else had come along and made her feel more special, more alive, more something. And in that moment I felt a sense of worthlessness so profound that it threatened to swallow me whole. I was a failure, a fraud, a man who had been so convinced of his own greatness that he had failed to see the truth that was right in front of him. I was nothing. I was a joke. The shock was a physical sensation, a cold, numbing wave that started in my feet and slowly worked its way up my body, paralyzing me, freezing me in place. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the phone still clutched in my hand, my eyes glued to the screen, reading and rereading the messages, as if somehow through sheer force of will I could change them, I could make them disappear. But they were real. They were undeniable. They were the brutal, irrefutable proof of her betrayal. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghosts of their conversations, their laughter, their whispers. The air was thick with their secrets, their lies, their shared intimacy. I was an intruder in my own home, a trespasser in my own life. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to smash the phone, to shatter it into a million pieces, to destroy the evidence of my own heartbreak. But I couldn't. It was a masochistic impulse, a desire to punish myself, to keep looking at the words that were tearing me apart. It was a form of self-flagellation, a way of convincing myself that this was real, that this was not just a terrible nightmare from which I would soon awake. The details of their conversations were a blur of pain and humiliation. They talked about everything, from the mundane details of their day to their deepest, most intimate thoughts and feelings. They had inside jokes, pet names, a shared history that had been built in the shadows of my own relationship. I was a footnote in my own life story, an obstacle to be overcome, a fool to be pitied. He was her confidant, her lover, her future, and I was just the past. The pain was a living entity, a ravenous beast that was devouring me from the inside out. It was a physical ache in my chest, a sharp, stabbing sensation that made it hard to breathe. I felt like I was having a heart attack, like my body was shutting down, unable to cope with the sheer, unadulterated agony of it all. I stumbled backwards, my legs weak and unsteady, and collapsed onto a kitchen chair, the phone falling from my limp hand and clattering onto the floor. The sound was a sharp, jarring note in the symphony of my silent suffering. I buried my face in my hands, a dry, racking sob escaping my lips. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain was too deep, too raw for tears. It was a soul-deep wound, a gaping chasm that had opened up in the very core of my being. The man I was just a few minutes ago, the hopeful, romantic fool with a bouquet of flowers and a heart full of love, was dead. And in his place was this broken, empty thing. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in a fog of pain and disbelief. Time seemed to have stopped, the world outside the four walls of that apartment ceasing to exist. My entire universe had been reduced to the size of that kitchen, to the cold, hard reality of those text messages. And then I heard it, the sound of a key in the lock, The sound of the door opening, the sound of her footsteps. My blood ran cold. My heart, which had been pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm, suddenly stopped. The beast in my chest went still, a predator lying in wait. I looked up, my eyes meeting hers as she walked into the kitchen, a breezy smile on her face, a bag of groceries in her hand. The smile faltered, then vanished as she took in the scene before her. The scattered peonies on the floor, the phone lying face up on the tiles, the look of utter devastation on my face. The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and guilt. The silence was back, but this time it was different. It was a taut, stretched silence, a silence that was pregnant with unspoken words, with accusations, with heartbreak. It was the silence of a reckoning. She knew. She knew that I knew. And in that single, shared glance, the entire artifice of our relationship, the carefully constructed facade of lies and deception, came crashing down around us. The game was over. The charade was at an end. All that was left was the raw, ugly, brutal truth. And the truth was that she had broken me. She had taken my heart, my trust, my future, and she had shattered them into a million irreparable pieces. And the worst part was, I had let her. I had handed her the hammer and chisel, and I had stood by and watched as she methodically, mercilessly destroyed me. The love I had felt for her, the all-consuming, unconditional love that had been the cornerstone of my life, was curdling into something else, something ugly and twisted. It was a toxic cocktail of anger, resentment, and a pain so profound that it felt like it would be a part of me forever. I was a man who had lost everything, and I had no one to blame but myself. I had been a fool, a blind, trusting fool, and this was my reward. This was my punishment. This was the price of love. And in the deafening silence of that kitchen, with the woman I loved standing before me like a stranger, I finally understood the true meaning of a broken man. She froze, a statue carved from guilt and surprise, the bag of groceries slipping from her grasp and thudding onto the floor, a mundane sound in a moment of earth-shattering significance. An apple rolled out, a perfect, unblemished sphere of red that came to a stop at my feet, a ridiculously trivial detail in the wreckage of my life. Her eyes darted from my face, a mask of cold, silent agony, to the phone on the floor, its screen a glowing testament to her betrayal, and then back to me. The silence stretched, a taut, vibrating wire of unspoken accusations and unbearable tension. It was a silence that held 2 years of love, 2 years of lies, and the entire weight of a future that would now never be. I didn't have to say a word. My eyes said it all. The question, the accusation, the heartbreak, it was all there, a raw, open wound for her to see. And in her eyes I saw the answer. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't anger, it was a flicker of something that looked like pity. And that was the cruelest cut of all. I didn't want her pity. I wanted her love, her loyalty, her honesty. I wanted the woman I had fallen in love with, not this stranger who stood before me, her face a mask of carefully constructed regret. I broke the silence, my voice a hoarse, unfamiliar whisper, a sound that seemed to come from a great distance. It was a simple question, a question that held the power to either confirm my worst fears or offer a sliver of hope, a lifeline to a man who was already drowning. Who's he? The words hung in the air, heavy and laden with a pain so profound that it was a physical presence in the room. I wasn't asking for a name. I didn't care about his name. I was asking for an explanation, a reason, a justification for the utter devastation she had wrought upon my life. I was asking her to make it make sense, to give me something, anything, to hold on to in the maelstrom of my emotions. She flinched, as if my words were a physical blow. Her mouth opened, then closed again, a fish gasping for air. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze, her eyes finding a sudden, intense fascination with the scattered peonies on the floor. The silence returned, more oppressive than before, and in that silence I found my answer. Her inability to speak, her inability to look at me, it was a confession more damning than any words she could have uttered. The silence was her truth, and her truth was that I was a fool. She finally spoke, her voice a small, trembling thing, a pale imitation of the confident, vibrant voice I had once loved. I didn't mean for it to happen. The words were a cliché, a line from a bad movie, a pathetic, cowardly attempt to absolve herself of responsibility. They were a denial of agency, a refusal to own her actions, her choices. It just happened, like a car accident, like a natural disaster, an act of God. It was an insult to my intelligence, a slap in the face to the man who had given her everything. And then came the final, fatal blow, the words that would be the epitaph on the tombstone of our relationship. But I've fallen for someone else. Fallen. The word was so gentle, so passive, so romantic, as if it was a beautiful, inevitable thing, a force of nature that she was powerless to resist. She hadn't chosen to betray me, to lie to me, to shatter my heart. She had simply fallen. And in that moment, something inside me broke. The last fragile thread of hope that I had been clinging to, the desperate, foolish belief that we could somehow fix this, that our love was strong enough to survive this, snapped. It was over. It was really, truly over. There was no going back. There was no fixing this. There was no us. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. The anger, the rage, the all-consuming fire that had been burning in my chest just moments before was gone, replaced by a cold, desolate emptiness. There was no fight left in me. I was a soldier who had surrendered, a king who had been dethroned. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. The words were a death sentence, and I accepted my fate with a quiet, dignified resignation. I didn't need to hear any more words. I didn't need the sordid details, the tearful explanations, the pathetic excuses. Her confession was enough. It was more than enough. It was the end. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate like an old man. I felt 1,000 years old, my body heavy with the weight of a grief so profound that it was a physical burden. I walked past her, my eyes fixed on a point in the distance, a point beyond the four walls of that apartment, a point beyond the wreckage of my life. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. To look at her would be to see the woman who had destroyed me, and I wasn't strong enough for that. I went to the bedroom, our bedroom, and I began to pack. I moved with a strange, detached efficiency, my hands packing a bag with a mind of their own. I was on autopilot, a machine programmed to perform a single, final task. I packed my clothes, my books, my toiletries, the small, insignificant objects that made up the fabric of my life. Each item was a memory, a ghost of a happier time. The hoodie she used to steal, the book we read together, the aftershave she bought me for my birthday. Each one was a fresh twist of the knife, a painful reminder of everything I had lost. But I didn't cry. The emptiness inside me was too vast, too desolate for tears. I was a man who had been hollowed out, a vessel drained of all emotion, all feeling, all life. She followed me, her presence a silent, unwelcome shadow in the doorway. I could feel her watching me, her gaze a heavy weight on my back. She wanted to say something, I could sense it. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to make herself feel better, but I didn't give her the chance. I didn't want her words. Her words were poison. Her words were lies. Her words were meaningless. I finished packing, zipped up the bag, and walked towards the door, towards my escape, towards the terrifying, unknown future that awaited me. I paused at the doorway, my back still to her, and for a fleeting, foolish moment I thought about turning around, about saying something, anything. A final, parting shot, a curse, a plea, a goodbye, but I didn't. There was nothing left to say. The silence was the only thing that was real, the only thing that was honest. The silence was our eulogy. And so I left. I walked out of that apartment, out of that life, out of that love, and I didn't look back. That's how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, quietly, painfully, with the soft, final click of a closing door. It ended with me walking away from something I thought was real, from a future I thought was mine. And all I could do now was keep walking, one foot in front of the other, into the vast, terrifying emptiness of a life without her. I was a broken man, a man who had lost everything. And the only thing I had left was the long, lonely road ahead. It was a road that I would have to walk alone, a road that I was not sure I had the strength to travel. But I had no other choice. I had to keep going. I had to keep breathing. I had to somehow, some way, learn to live again. But in the deafening silence of my shattered heart, I had no idea how. All I knew was the pain, the emptiness, the all-consuming, soul-crushing reality of a love that was gone forever. And that was a reality that I would have to carry with me, a heavy, invisible burden for the rest of my life. The world outside the apartment was a blur of motion and noise, a stark contrast to the silent, sterile world I had just left behind. The sounds of the city, the honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren, all of it seemed alien, intrusive, a violation of the sacred, terrible silence of my grief. I walked without direction, without purpose, the bag in my hand a heavy, tangible reminder of my homelessness, my displacement. I was a refugee, a man without a country, a man without a home, because home was not a place. Home was a person, and my home was gone. I walked for hours, the city lights blurring together through a haze of unshed tears. I was a ghost in the machine, a silent observer of a world that was moving on without me, a world that was oblivious to the cataclysm that had just occurred in my own, small, insignificant life. The night was a cold, indifferent witness to my suffering, the stars in the sky a million tiny mocking diamonds. I finally found myself at a park, the same park where we had our first date, the place where it had all begun. It was a cruel, masochistic pilgrimage, a desire to revisit the scene of the crime, to stand on the hallowed ground where my dreams had been born and where they had now died. I sat on a bench, the same bench where we had shared our first kiss, and I looked up at the moon, a pale, silent orb in the inky blackness. And for the first time that night I cried. The tears came, hot and silent, a torrent of grief that I had been holding back for what felt like an eternity. They were tears of pain, of anger, of confusion, of a heartbreak so profound that it felt like it would tear me apart. I cried for the man I used to be, the naive, hopeful fool who had believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I cried for the woman I had lost, the woman I had loved more than life itself. And I cried for the future that had been stolen from me, the future that I would now have to face alone. The tears were a release, a cleansing, a baptism of sorrow, but they didn't wash away the pain. They didn't heal the wound. They just left me feeling empty, drained, a hollowed-out shell of a man. The road ahead was long and uncertain, a winding, treacherous path through the darkness of my own despair. I didn't know if I had the strength to make the journey, if I had the will to survive. But as I sat there under the cold, indifferent gaze of the moon, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this destroy me. I would not let her have that power over me. I would survive. I would heal. I would learn to live again. It would be the hardest thing I had ever done, a battle that I would have to fight every single day, but I would fight. I would fight for my life, for my sanity, for my future. I was a broken man, but I was not a defeated one. And in the depths of my despair, I found a flicker of something that I thought I had lost forever, a flicker of hope, a flicker of strength, a flicker of the man I used to be. And it was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all I had left. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. What moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.